What's up, John Clayton, damn it?
How's it going?
John, Clayton is with the Seahawks. And, John, as we would expect, Pete Carroll addressed how Sherman has reacted. What did he have to say?
Well, what Richard Sherman was able to talk about after the game is pretty much what Pete Carroll's kind of addressing today on his radio show. What Pete was saying is that, he's going to stand by the player, but also he has talked to Richard Sherman about the comments and also to try to make sure that you protect this team. That's one of the most important things that he wants to do. But he understands that Richard is very talkative, is going to have some plans on how he wants to address different players. As he said, it's Richard just being Richard.
Yeah, rule number one.
Richard is that fiery guy. He's just going to go, and that's who he is. That was Richard being Richard, and in a moment where you almost would like to just kind of pull him to the side and take a knee for a while. And so how we handle that is we try to grow and learn and work our way through who we are and figure out who we want to be and who we want to project and learn. This was an extraordinary learning opportunity. And so hopefully you'll see some benefits from this.
Susie, Richard Sherman told me this summer that just about everything he does is planned as far as what he does. He edits himself, but also, too, he's going to say what he wants to say. This goes back to an incident with Michael Crabtree where they almost got into a fight in Arizona attending a charity event, and now it's carried through to a point where he's taken it to the podium at the NFC Championship game.
Obviously, many layers to the story. Let's just hope if the number one lesson is protect the team carries on for the next couple of weeks through the Super Bowl. And speaking of the Super Bowl, we know Percy Harvin missed the NFC Championship game. What's his early status?
It looks like he is going to be able to play. Pete Carroll did say on Monday morning that he is planning on him being able to play. Last Friday, Pete Carroll said that Harvin should be able to practice sometime this week. Last week ran out of time. Looks like there's plenty of time for him to play in the Super Bowl.
All right, we will look forward to that. John, thanks. John Clayton live from Seattle.
A pleasure, as always, to be joined by ESPN senior writer and commentator John Clayton. John, good evening.
Good evening.
So it snowed. A, I just hope there's nobody out here in Times Square trying to build a studio or something. But B, traffic leaving New York for the suburbs, like, just to pick one at random, East Rutherford, New Jersey, it's been bad. Obviously, if this happens a week from Sunday, they can play. But can people get there? Might they postpone because of bad roads?
It's possible, but I think at this stage, this is a nice trial run for the National Football League. In fact, what they're doing over the next 24 hours, Eric Grubman, the vice president of the league, is kind of using the stadium as an action center, trying to go with a meteorologist that they have 24 hours a day to try to see what type of things they can do, how they can remove the snow, how they can get people there in case it is like that. Now, the meteorologists are telling him at this stage it's going to be somewhere between 29 and 37 degrees as a high, 19 as a low. There's going to be about 30% chance of rain and snow, so they know there's going to be some conditions. They don't think it's going to be bad, but this can give them some ideas. And I go back, I was actually at the Baltimore game in Chicago when they had the tornado and the evacuation, all those different things. So they're now better prepared for it, but how can you predict weather? It's not easy.
But you can predict some things based on weather, and you've dug up some data that suggests that if that high of 37 with some snow is what we're going to see, that's not good news for one of the quarterbacks. You want to share?
Yeah, that's not good news for Peyton Manning because you can see as the temperatures go down, the winds kick up, and the weather gets worse, it's not good for him. I mean, you look at just what happens to him in the regular season. He goes from about 7.6 yards an attempt down to 7 yards an attempt. His interceptions go up. And remember, this is not the young Peyton Manning who had a stronger arm back then. He's going to be throwing into some bad conditions. Playoff-wise, when he's in the playoffs, 4 times in the playoffs where it's 40 or below, his completion percentage goes again in the 50s, mid-50s, 9 interceptions. That's not good. And now he's facing a defense that's probably better than any of those Bill Belichick defenses because they have a great secondary. This will not be easy with the weather conditions for Peyton Manning.
All right, weather aside for a moment, John, you had another assessment of a key matchup that is just wonderful to contemplate because it's pot roast versus Skittles. If you'd explain that one, please.
Well, you have a meal and you have a snack, and so when you have pot roast, who is Terrence Knighton, that's his nickname, clogging the middle, he's going to be the one key guy that the Seahawks have to block. And they have some problems because Max Unger has been fighting some injuries all year. They've been moving guards around at different points, and you saw what Knighton was able to do in stopping the New England Patriots running game. Now it comes down to Skittles. Does he take it to the outside? Does he try to go inside? You would have to think he's probably going to do more stretch plays because if not, if they stop the run of Seattle, the Broncos have a decent chance of winning this football game.
John, you've also noted that the team of officials is interesting because the back judge is going to be Steve Freeman, who did Panthers-Niners, the game in which the Panthers DPs and the Niners receivers were chirping at one another. What does the combination potentially mean of Steve Freeman and Richard Sherman?
Well, what it does mean is that they've not been calling interference calls, which could betray the Seattle Seahawks, who probably have the most aggressive group of cornerbacks of putting hands on wide receivers. And knowing that there's going to be 3 and 4 receiver sets and there's no interference. There's only been 7 interference calls in the 10 playoff games, and that, I think, benefits Seattle, because Seattle could tend to get 2 or 3. And so far, the crews have been warned, don't throw too many flags. And there's been complaints by Jim Harbaugh and others because of that. This could give another advantage Seattle, particularly with Peyton Manning throwing in the cold and those receivers getting grabbed.
And lastly, our headline tonight, PATRIP. I did the history. I mean, as I said before, I'm awarding this now to the WFL. And the action point. But this idea of eliminating points after and going to, what would we call it, a gamble point? You get 7 points for a touchdown. You successfully convert, you get the 8th. You fail, you lose a point. Would they actually do that?
I don't know. I think it depends if the coaches are in the room in March when they do the voting or not. If the coaches are in there, I think they'll say no, they don't want to do that. But there's been times where they just go to the owners, and the owners have the vote, and they say, what are we talking about here? Yeah, let's eliminate that. That's not a big play. So I have to think if the coaches show some protest and are in the room, then the action point may not be there. So I have to think that this is one that's going to go to March, and the coaches raise a stink, then it's not going to happen. But it could happen, and that could mean the action point.
Very nicely done. ESPN senior writer and commentator John Clayton got it on the second try. Thanks, John.
I'm John Clayton with your Super Bowl preview. The big news in Seattle is that Percy Harvin is back on the field, having recovered from a concussion. He only had 37 plays this year, hip surgery, of course, keeping him out most of the season, but he could have a big impact on the Super Bowl. The biggest problem is for Denver trying to figure out what to do with him. If you go back to the New Orleans playoff game, they used a fly sweep, which is a college play in which he gained 9 yards. Here's how confused the Saints defense was after that play. They had linebackers going to him when he was in the slot, but he wasn't even moving. What the Seahawks did was hand the ball off to Marshawn Lynch. He bolted down the right side, got a touchdown. That means that the run game could be positively affected. Also, they could get big play abilities. Percy Harvin is fast, super fast, and the fact that he's now having full practices is an indication. It's not that he's going to have a big game where he might be the MVP, but he's a big problem for the defense. Now, speaking of what's going to happen in the game, watch this with Wes Welker. Now, Wes Welker, of course, the controversy for his hit on Aqib Talib, which was determined to be legal. But pick plays are going to be a big part of the Super Bowl. They need to be. The Seahawks use man-to-man. And because of that man-to-man, the one way to counter that is to try to have a stack formation and crossing patterns. Now, the Seahawks are going to be very physical. They're aware that Wes Welker and others are going to try to come in there, and that's why you can expect a lot of collisions with the passing game. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Huddle. I'm John Clayton for ESPN.com. Since becoming a starting cornerback, Richard Sherman of the Seahawks has considered it a personal insult to have somebody throw a fade pass against him. His rant against Michael Crabtree is in part because of the pride he takes in stopping the fade. Sherman's technique is to take away the space in front of a receiver and then use his 6'3" height to take away the ball. Pete Carroll put Sherman in a league with Hall of Fame cornerback Mike Haynes in being able to defend the fade. The tug of war in Super Bowl 48 is trying to determine whether it's better to be the #1 offense or the #1 defense. From 1984 to 2005, you needed a top 10 defense in fewest points allowed to win a Super Bowl. Peyton Manning changed that in 2006 by winning a ring with the 23rd ranked team for scoring. Eli Manning, Drew Brees, and Joe Flacco won rings without a top 10 defense. Pete Carroll and the Seahawks may be old school in trying to win with the #1 defense, but he believes his formula might work. Peyton Manning is warming up to the idea of playing in a cold weather Super Bowl. With temperatures in New York projected to be in the 30s or below, Manning is trying to reverse an 0-4 playoff record with temperatures below 40 in the playoffs. in those 4 games, his completion percentage drops to 56.4, and his yards per attempt dropped to a chilly 5.53. Expect Manning to attack the Seahawks defense with crossing routes and stacked formations to try to counter the Seahawks man-to-man defense. Colin Kaepernick's mission next season is to try to improve his throwing from the pocket during the playoffs. Against the Seahawks in the NFC title game, Kaepernick completed only 9 of 17 passes for 76 yards and 2 interceptions from the pocket. He connected on less than 60% of his pocket throws during the other 2 playoff games this year. But during the regular season, he ranked 5th with a QBR throwing from the pocket, completing 60.5% of his passes and having 16 touchdowns. Last year, he was 65.7% from the pocket during the regular season and having a 9.03 yards per attempt. That was best in the NFL in yards per attempt from the pocket. That's it for this week's edition for Inside the Huddle. Be back next week for the Super Bowl. Don't forget to watch the Insider Show. It's weekdays, 3 p.m., and you will see it on ESPN. I'm John Clayton for ESPN.com.
Against that Seahawks team. Speaking of which, I'm going to send it over to John Clayton in Seattle.
Well, Percy Harvin's a full go for Super Bowl 48, and I mean full go. Pete Carroll said there may not be any pitch count or play count on how he's going to go. He's good to go for everything. They rested Doug Baldwin with a hip injury. They also rested Marshawn Lynch with a knee injury. They're also going to be probable for this game. Now, all the game plan is in. They've worked on a lot of different things, particularly trying to guard against some of the things that Peyton Manning's going to do at the line of scrimmage. They're going to play man. They know there's going to be expectations of crossing routes. All that stuff's in the playbook.
John Clayton shows his passion for football daily. He's in Seattle now with the Seahawks. And John, we just heard from Richard Sherman. What were his teammates saying about the cornerback today?
Well, what they're saying is support. I mean, the one thing that he's very fortunate in having is an understanding coach who used this as an education tool. Pete Carroll educated him. It's like, listen, you got to keep the team in mind if you're going to be saying things like that. And teammates like his secondary, all through the offense, that respect him, understand how hard he works, understand his passion. But really, players like Russell Wilson saying this really isn't a distraction at all.
In terms of Richard Sherman, I mean, he's an unbelievable football player. You know, he's made all the plays. He's backed it up. You know, I have tons of respect for him. He's one of the most intelligent people you'll ever meet. You know, he plays the game of football with tons of passion, tons of fire. So, you know, it's just we're going to the Super Bowl. It's one of the things that he just got excited. And, you know, I know he apologized and all that for all the distractions and all that. But he's one of those people that he's always focused on how he can improve and how he can help our football team. He's a great teammate. So I have tons of respect for Richard. You know, I know that, you know, he apologized and all that, so he didn't mean to blow it all up. He just was just so excited that he played such a great game and made a huge play for us.
Richard Sherman had a 20-minute press conference where he tried to express how surprised he was at the reaction and that he did probably go a little bit too far. But he was even further surprised afterwards when a couple reporters came over and showed him some clips of people going into news breaks and saying, okay, breaking news, and there's Richard Sherman's rant. And he's like, wow, this is really something. So I guess this going viral shocked him, but he used it against something that can educate him. But of course, remember, he's going to be on the podium a lot coming up for the Super Bowl.
And you know, you got to give him credit, John, for at least talking even further to explain himself rather than just deciding to stay quiet about it. That's John Clayton in Seattle with the Seahawks.
For more on the Seahawks now, we bring in our NFL insider, John Clayton. John, we talked about it yesterday on this particular show. The Seahawks got good news. Percy Harvin has been cleared to play. He's back on the practice field. How much does Harvin's return mean to the Seahawks as they face the Broncos?
It means a lot as far as strategy, because whether you put him in the backfield to try to run the football on a fly sweep, or whether you put him out there in the slot to try to get downfield and make some big plays, it creates a lot of matchup problems. And you go back to the New Orleans games and just watch how, even though he was on the field for only 17 plays, how the Saints reacted to him. They started moving toward him every time he would think about getting the ball, and even after a play where he didn't get the ball, he was getting hit. You know, you're talking about a top 5 offensive athlete that can really make a difference in a game. Now, will he play a lot? Probably not. But the time that he's on the field is going to create a lot of confusion for the Broncos, because they just don't know which way he's going to get the ball. But at some point, he's going to get the ball.
You know, as we've been talking about ad nauseum, and it's just the beginning with 10 days till kickoff, no one on this Seahawks team has ever played in a Super Bowl before. How is that affecting the preparation?
Really, what Pete Carroll's trying to do is treat this almost like a bowl week if he was back at USC and try to keep everything normal. And so, for example, it was competition Wednesday where everybody was competing there. They're still trying to figure out who's going to start at left guard, who's going to start at one of the outside linebacker spots. Today's turnover Thursday where they're going to bring back all the different things as far as the numbers of trying to win the turnover battle. But the big thing for everybody, and I know Doug Baldwin and others were coming in at 6 in the morning each day, Russell Wilson and others trying to make sure this is like a normal week.
Our football team's extremely young. You know, we're one of the youngest teams in the National Football League, and to be where we are right now, you know, one of our things is we want to win a lot of Super Bowls, and to do that, you got to win the first one. And we're excited about that. All of our guys are fired up. I think we have a certain itch to us, and we know on the other side they have players that have won the Super Bowl and been in the Super Bowls and big games like that. And so we know that they're gonna prepare the right way. They're gonna understand how to prepare, and so we're going to have to listen to our coaches and try to learn as much as we can and just get prepared however's best for us. You know.
Linda, one thing is the last team that did this was the 1990 Buffalo Bills, and they made 4 separate trips to the Super Bowl. So you can go in raw and not know and still come out pretty professional.
Now, you know I got to get to Richard Sherman. He faced the media yesterday for the first time since his post-game rant about Michael Crabtree. What is he saying about all the attention he's getting?
He was stunned because even when reporters after his 20-minute press conference came over and showed that they were breaking into live news feeds with the press conference and taking his rant through, and he's realizing that things that he say can make a major impact. But the big thing is he's not going to change, but he's now more educated. The thing that I think upset him the most is the fact that he was being called a thug, and the thing that he also wants to make sure that everybody knows he's not a villain.
I mean, I was on a football field, you know, showing passion. You know, maybe it was misdirected. Maybe, you know, things may have been immature. You know, things could have been worded better. But this is on a football field. You know, I wasn't committing any crimes, you know, doing anything illegal. I was showing passion after a football game.
NFL Films had him mic'd up for the game, and so afterwards it did show that he did go over to Michael Crabtree and try to congratulate him and say great game, and then of course was shoved in the face, and then he just absolutely exploded. Yeah, he knows he took it a little bit too far, but still, he's going to talk, he's going to say things. He just has to make sure, according to Pete Carroll, that he protects the team when he says something that may be controversial.
His marketing skills also has exploded for sure with a new headphones commercial, and it's right out of reality. John Clayton with the latest from the Seahawks.
John Clayton is with the Seahawks, and John, Percy Harvin back on the practice field. He will play in Super Bowl 48. He spoke to the media yesterday. How excited is he just to be back in the game, and what do his teammates have to say about his return?
I mean, he's excited because, I mean, it's been a very frustrating season for him not being able to do more than 37 plays this year. And, you know, he wanted to do much, and he loves the game of football. And so now he's back practicing, and because of his speed, I mean, you can see the explosiveness out there. And because of that, for this game, he will be the X factor.
It's been a roller coaster, but it's all been a blessing. I wouldn't take anything back that's happened this year. It's made me a stronger person. Like I said, it's definitely been frustrating for a lot of people, not only myself, but for my teammates. You know, Doug, some of the guys that play my position, coming in and out, not knowing whether I'm gonna be at practice. So it was definitely frustrating. But like I said, it's all over with now. We get a chance to play for the Super Bowl, so that's all in the past.
It's just so many things you got to look for in a guy like him. It's a guy that can be in the backfield, a guy who can be split out at receiver. It's just so many ways you can use him. So it's a lot of different things you have to look for and things you have to put in packages for a guy like that.
I think he looks like me on offense. You know, he's playing faster than everybody out there, and it's fun to watch.
Now, what's going to happen is the Denver Broncos have to figure out how the Seahawks are going to use him, because you can line him up in the backfield and do fly sweeps. You can have him do passes from the slot. You can also have him kick return. I mean, this guy is very explosive and could be a big factor in Super Bowl 48.
Now, John, I understand you found out something interesting also yesterday about Russell Wilson and how he's preparing to try and avoid turnovers. Tell us what he's doing.
Well, I'm amazed just how well prepared he is. And for a second-year player, every year I go to all the quarterbacks at the Super Bowl and ask, are you prepared for the different type of ball you're going to get in the Super Bowl? Because on the logo, there's going to be, you know, extra paint on them. He actually knows this. He actually knows the number of footballs, 56, and he's having them all rubbed down, and he knows the rotation of how the balls are going to go in. For somebody who's never been to the Super Bowl, somebody that gets to the office here in Seattle at about 5 or 6 in the morning, to think that far ahead, I just find it amazing. Russell Wilson is one of the most prepared quarterbacks and one of the most prepared players in the league. He's well beyond his young age as where he is as far as getting ready for football games.
And John, on that note, he also said in the press conference that he attended the Super Bowl last year just to see what it's like in case they get back there. So as you mentioned, he is a well-prepared guy. John Clayton also well-prepared. He's with the Seahawks.